The criminalization of undocumented immigrants has left these immigrants vulnerable to the point where they are almost considered rightless. When individuals are labeled as illegal, the rule of law, which should provide protection, often becomes inapplicable to them. And this is not just particular to the United States. Hello, welcome to All Things Immigrants and Society podcast. Let's break barriers, change the narrative, and navigate this path together. You're not alone. I'm your host, Dr. Iwu. Welcome to another episode of All Things Immigrants and Society. I'm your host, Dr. Iwu, and today we're going to explore a very crucial topic, one that lies at the intersection of human movement, international law, and state sovereignty. Today we're going to look at why immigrants who move into other countries without due process and those who overstay their visas in other countries are criminalized in the world today. We'll also look at how these laws have evolved and why these laws particularly remain very contentious globally. And so we'll look at a bit of history today. We'll look at some legal dynamics, especially the ones that have criminalized immigration. We'll look at how state sovereignty, which is the cornerstone of international law, is being shaped by current dynamics. And so today we'll get into some historical and legal dynamics. We'll also look at how state sovereignty, which is ultimately the cornerstone of international law, has criminalized immigration and is causing a lot of fear in immigrants, especially with Donald Trump coming back into the White House. So welcome on this journey. If you like what you're hearing, stay with me. Leave us a comment. Let me know what you want us to discuss next. Let me know your opinion about the things that I discuss on this podcast. And together we can make this journey a very, very meaningful one. Migration is as old as humanity itself. And from the early migrations out of East Africa to the spread of people across continents, humans have always moved in search of safety, in search of resources, and in search of opportunities. Now, this natural behavior was largely unrestricted in early history because borders as we know them today did not exist. It wasn't until treaties like the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 that the modern concept of state sovereignty was established. These treaties ended the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War, emphasizing the exclusive authority of states over their territories and population. So basically, kings, the 30 Years' War was about kings and their subjects, and it was mainly a religious kind of war between Catholics and Pentecostal. If the king were Catholic, does it mean that all the subjects have to be Catholic? If they were Pentecostal, does it mean that all the subjects had to be Pentecostal? So these were some clashes that existed for about 30 years. The 80 years of war was basically about the Dutch territories and what rulership would look like for those Dutch territories. And so this principle of Westphalia laid the foundation for modern international law and the rigid border system that we see today. However, these same principles also created gray areas in international law, especially concerning migration. States have the sovereign right to control who enters and who resides within their borders, but they must balance these rights with human rights obligations and international agreements. This tension is what we have at the heart of modern-day immigration debates. The criminalization of migration is a relatively recent phenomenon. Immigration violations were once treated as a civil matter, but over time, they became criminalized. So this shift reflects broader societal attitude about who belongs and who doesn't. Historically, this was evident in laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which barred Chinese immigrants from entering the United States. And of course, the Immigration Act of 1924, which implemented quotas favoring mostly the Northern and Western Europeans over other races. And these laws framed certain immigrants as undesirable, cementing a narrative of exclusion. Fast forward to today, immigration-related offenses like overstaying a visa or unauthorized entry are criminalized in many countries, not just the United States. Now, this criminalization is tied to state sovereignty. States use immigration laws to reinforce their control over national borders. But this is also influenced by societal fears and political rhetoric. For instance, research has constantly shown that while public opinion often links immigration to crime, empirical evidence doesn't support this claim. Immigrants, especially undocumented ones, are less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens. And here is where things get even more complex. International law recognizes the sovereignty of states, but it also upholds certain human rights principles. For example, the 1951 Refugee Convention obligates states to protect individuals who are fleeing persecution from their home country. However, there is no comprehensive international framework that governs regular migration, so it leaves each state to enforce its own immigration laws. This inconsistency has created a dilemma. On the one hand, countries are within their rights to criminalize unauthorized migration, and on the other hand, such policies can clash with international human rights norms. Now, this tension often leaves migrants in a vulnerable position, particularly in politically charged environments. As you must have seen in the couple of hours or in the couple of days, with Donald Trump's return to the White House, immigration policies have once again become a lightning rod for political debate. His administration's focus on mass deportation has left many undocumented immigrants in a state of panic. Now, even though changes in immigration policies are constrained by the rule of law in the US and other countries, the criminalization of undocumented immigrants has left these immigrants vulnerable to the point where they are almost considered rightless. When individuals are labeled as illegal, the rule of law, which should provide protection, often becomes inapplicable to them. And this is not just particular to the United States. Political leaders frequently emphasize their illegality and effectively erasing their humanity and rights in public discourse. Now, this creates a system where fear and marginalization dominate rather than justice and inclusion. It's crucial to remember that these individuals are not faceless statistics. They are families, they are workers and members of our communities. They often have no legal resources due to this rightless status imposed on them. And so what can we learn from all this? First, immigration is not a crime. Immigration is a natural part of human history. Criminalizing it reflects societal fears rather than an objective understanding of its impact. Secondly, we must challenge the stereotype. We must challenge the misinformation that surrounds immigration. Research consistently shows that immigrants contribute positively to their communities, both economically and socially. We also need to advocate for balanced policies that respect state sovereignty while upholding human rights and human dignity. This includes ensuring that immigrant enforcement does not criminalize individuals for simply seeking better lives. As I wrap up this episode, I want to remind you that immigration is deeply intertwined with human history. Immigration has shaped civilization. It has driven progress and has connected cultures. And so the criminalization of migration is a relatively new phenomenon rooted in the complexities of modern sovereignty and political fears. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found today's episode enlightening, please share it with someone who might benefit from it as usual. Together, I am very confident that we can foster understanding and compassion in the immigration debate. Until next time, this is Dr. Ewu reminding you that the story of migration is the story of humanity itself.